Hey everyone. Thanks for coming today. I'm very sorry that I can't be there myself to give this lesson or have a discussion with you in person. I would have much preferred that, but something came up at work, so I couldn't. Anyway, I've told Aaron and the rest of the group that I'm more than happy to make myself available to you after the fact. If you have questions or comments of any type, feel free to send me an email, give me a phone call, whatever the case. I'm happy to talk or meet in person. So use me as a resource in the future. But without further ado, I'll jump into it. So today we're going to talk about record keeping, and um, I I think record keeping is really important for a number of reasons, but um, I think the most important reason is the fact that as a farmer, you have decided to take this seriously enough that you want to make a profession of it, at least for some period of time in your life. And if you are going to commit yourself that much to doing something, you should make sure that you're putting systems in place to actually measure what you're doing so you can improve. Because you can't get better if you don't know how good you're doing. And the easiest metaphor that comes to mind is something like sports. I ran track growing up, and I know that I would have never gotten as good as I did if I didn't have metrics like times on the track to make sure that I was getting better despite what I felt or what I thought was true. Numbers are a scientific way to back that up against reality, aside from whatever you might perceive. So that's one good reason to keep records. But what I'd like to do is at least try to make this interactive, even though you're watching me on a screen. And hopefully this doesn't turn into some sort of awkward adult Dora the Explorer kind of thing where I'm asking a question and pausing and waiting for all of you to respond, even though I'm not there. But we'll see how it goes. And maybe if Aaron or somebody is in the room, they can pause me and you can have a discussion along the way as I pose these questions, because I want to set the stage for what I'm about to show you so we can all be thinking about it critically as I go through one example of what I've produced to put these systems in place. So I've given you one reason that I think record keeping is important. I would like you to jot down on a piece of paper or share with the class a reason that you think record keeping is important. And I'm sure there's a lot more. Everyone probably has their own idea, but take a moment to do that. And after you've done that, I want you to also jot down a few bullets for what are the most important records to keep. Is it your harvest? Is it how much you planted? Is it the amount you spend on labor? Is it a list of things that you should grow? Whatever it is, just jot down the most important things. And with all that in mind, I probably should have started with this actually. What do you think what is the goal of you operating your own farm? What do you determine a success? You might think making money is part of that success. Maybe some other sort of metric that's more intrinsic is a metric of success, but I'd like you to write that down too. All right. So another thing that I want you to keep in mind as we go through this, and jot these down too, if you think it's relevant, or if that's what you're doing over there. This is kind of weird for me trying to talk to somebody that's not there. So pardon me if I feel a little flummoxed. So what are the reasons you might fail? These are all ideals that we have in mind. The reason we want to record and the data points we want to record, but you have enough experience at this point in school or work to realize that you are very likely going to fail at some point of trying to keep track of all this information. So I want you to think of a list of reasons that you're going to fail. And another way to think about it might be, what are things that are likely to take more of a priority than the records that you're seeking to keep on your farm? Okay, so hopefully you have some ideas jotted down, and maybe later you as a class can discuss those. But one thing that I want to discuss before I go into the tools is this perspective that I want you to keep in mind as we go through this. So that perspective is, farming is a practice of putting systems in place. We tend to think about that in the context of ecosystems very often, like cultivating the land and breeding better plants. But putting business systems in place is a critical part of building a healthy farm too, because you need to be financially sustainable to be environmentally sustainable. So as I go through the tools I built, I want you to understand how they work within the system of your farm, the ecosystem, the business system, how they're going to fit into your day-to-day, because spreadsheets won't do you any good if you never collect any numbers. All right, so at this point, I'm going to share my screen with you and show you the crop planning tool. So hopefully you already have your own copy. If not, you can go to bit.ly.com/Todd's Farm Tools. You'll just enter some information in, and in Google Drive, you'll have a folder made with a copy of everything for you. But I'm going to start with the record keeping tool. So what you see here is the crop plan that I made. So my goal in building this was to make it extremely easy for a farmer like yourself to get started. So the idea is you start with a zip code here. That's going to pull in frost date information from almanac.com and put those in place for you just as a reference. And then below, what it's going to do is ask you to put in the plants that you want to grow, select a date that you're going to start them, as well as a transplant date if you're starting them in a greenhouse and then moving them outside. And then finally, there's an estimated harvest, but that's going to be estimated for you, which is one of the things that I did to try and make this easier. And another thing here, which we can go into more detail later, is the bed. And I'll explain all these letters and numbers in a moment. But to start, I'm just going to go to the top and go through this with you. And if ever you need another reference, there's a tutorial video you can click on here. I'm sure Aaron will share this link with the team as well if you want to reference this in the future. So I'm just going to choose Wilson. So that's where I live. You'll see that it's going to take a moment to compute, and you can see it pulled in the frost dates. So the spring frost date 4/20, the final frost 10/24, and does some simple math for you and shows that that's only 10 days away. So that helps give a farmer some context. You'll be thinking about this in terms of 2016, so the numbers calculated will be a bit different. But what I want to do here is go through the crop plan. So the mental model that I have in mind, and hopefully you have in mind, is this. Farms have fields, fields have beds, beds have crops. So in this scenario, I just imagined a farm that has 4 fields. Each is just referenced by northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. And each of those fields has 4 beds. So I made a really simple abbreviation to put in here, northeast 1, 2, 3, 4, to use as a reference for me. And if I were farming with a team, the rest of the team, to understand where everything is going to be planted, and then use that as a reference point in the future as well, so I can keep this as a record for crop rotations and remembering where I need to put the nightshades next year so they're not in the same place as they were last year, or something to that effect. With plant type, I've built a database that pulls in some very simple information. So this is not so detailed that it's going to have the crop variety, but it does have at least the type to get you started. And I'll show you that really quick. This is the database. So you can see all the plant types I have here. There are 48 of them. We have information like the time to maturity, things like spacing, the estimated yield, and the amount of money you might collect for them at market. We'll get to all of these numbers on another page, but the one that's relevant right now is the time to maturity. So this is basically going to allow you to enter the date you want to plant them and then automatically calculate the date that you are going to have they're likely to be ready for harvest. There's a lot of factors that go into that. I understand. This is just a tool for estimating and getting you started. So let's go back to the input and display page. So if I select beet, I can change that to any number of things. I could do radishes, for example. Go down here, select radish, and you can see how that's going to change the number and change the graph representing these numbers. So you have 326. That's the date that I want to start it. If I want to do I don't know, 4/1 instead, I can enter that, and it'll change the estimated harvest for you again. If I wanted to change when I'm transplanting the broccoli, for example, again, I just need to change that. Maybe I want to put it out after frost has passed, so I'll do 4/25. And you can see how that changes the graph. So the graph here is representing the total span of time that the crops are in the ground. You have the start date, which is represented here, and then the estimated harvest. And in the case where there's a blue bar taking up part of the space, that's the time that it's in the greenhouse or something like that. So that's what the representation means. For me personally, I really like to have a visual reference rather than just having a bunch of dates, which can look like gobbledygook, especially if you've been staring at something for a long time. It's nice just to be able to enter a date and see what it does to the graph, because this personally seems much more intuitive to me. So that's how this part works. I won't go into this too much because I hope it's very intuitive. That was my goal in building it. You can see that with this crop plan, I have layered in different types of crops in the same bed. So I'm doing multiple staggered plantings. I'm starting with radishes and switching to chard in this case. And that's what's happening in Northeast bed 1. And then in Northwest 3 and Northwest 4, you can see that I have multiple plantings of broccoli put in there, starting them in the greenhouse, transplanting them outside, starting them in the greenhouse, and then transplanting them outside. You can do a million different things with this. I wanted to design it to be very flexible. But one more thing before I leave this page that I'm going to point out is it also allows you to sort information, which I think is neat with this filter. So as of right now, it's organized by bed. So that's the way that I think about starting a crop plan. I just imagine my farm and I think, okay, I'm going to go bed by bed and just imagine what needs to be planted where. But as a way to sort of check my work and understand when things need to be started, I'm going to want to look at that in a different way so everything isn't staggered anymore. So I'm going to sort A to Z by seed date. So you can see the dates will change, and it'll change the graph here to represent when things need to be started in a more orderly fashion. So you can think about in the spring, okay, I'm going to need to start these seeds on this date, these seeds on this date. So everything works out as I planned. And then when it comes to sort of checking your work maybe, because if the idea of a crop plan is to make sure that everything is thought through in detail before you get to the actual farming season and things are moving too fast for you to improvise or things get lost in the cracks. You want to make sure you're setting yourself up for success. And one of those things that you'll want to check with your crop plan is to make sure that you have continual harvest of crops coming in to sustain your farm's revenue numbers. So you can then sort by estimated harvest to see when things are coming in here. Okay, so that's the crop planning side. That's laying everything out. Another part of this is the estimated revenue. And I'll say at this point, maybe it's a good idea for Aaron to sort of like pause the video and just get a discussion or dialogue going so they don't have to listen to me drone on or and fall asleep, because I'm sure this is kind of monotonous, especially if you're just sharing a screen and I can't be there to interact and take questions as we go. So feel free to pause me and I'll be here when you get back. Okay, oops, looks like my battery's dying. Okay, so on the estimated revenue page, we have a number of different ways you can start to sort of make projections about your farm. And again, this is referencing the database that I showed you with the assumptions that I have in there. You can change anything you want in the database to reflect the way that you think your farm should operate or does operate. But I think it's helpful just to have something there and get started, because I am the kind of person that likes to have sort of like a hunk of clay and start to mold it. I like having something to start with and play with rather than just having to come up with something out of thin air. So that's why I did it that way. Please feel free to change it. This is your farm, your crop plan. I can't overstate that. So with this, the estimated yields are very simply organized. It's either low, medium, or high. And this was taken from a gardening book I found. I'm blanking on the name at the moment, but this is going to depend on a lot of things. You could be affected by weather. You could be affected by your own skill, the quality of the land that you're farming. But this just kind of allows you to do some changes in bulk calculation to see what you might get in a good year and what you might get in a bad year, so you can understand ranges a bit, because as we know in farming, nothing ever works out exactly as planned. And then you have, are you measuring beds in square feet or row feet? As of right now, this actually only works for square feet, but if you want to do row feet, I'd be happy to work with you to make sure that that works. But this is an attempt to start to get you to understand what sort of revenue your farm might bring in, depending on where you're selling your food. So what it's going to do with the crop plan is automatically bring in these numbers for you from the other page. So you don't have to re-enter these. They should be automatically entered. You will need to enter the area planted. That, as I mentioned, is square feet. This is probably very confusing, so I suggest you ignore it. I've thought about deleting it, but I haven't yet. So I'm going to skip this. Potential plantings. This is a calculation based on the square footage. So if you're putting 800 square feet of radishes in, and we can see in the database that radishes, the spacing is a radish every 2 inches, then you're going to need approximately 28,000 seeds. That's the idea behind that. So just giving you an idea of how much you need to purchase for seed. Pounds produced, this is of course going back to the yield number. So if you have this much planted and this is your yield, this is your estimated pounds produced. You can see how that will change if I change it to high yield. Type of sale, this again goes back to the database. R means retail, W means wholesale, and you can put any number of things you want in there. But you can see that our retail prices, I just found a list online and used those. W wholesale prices, again, change these if you like. If you want to come up with something totally different, just put it in other, that will work too. So that altogether gives you your estimated revenue per crop, okay? So again, this might be a good point to pause the video and discuss among the class any questions that you have about how to calculate this. Again, this is one way I've put it together. You might have ideas about how to do this yourself, and that's totally fine. Okay, so this graph here will kind of make sense in a moment. I just liked it as a visual representation of what I'm going to show you below. And this is a concept I think is really important and might be hard to wrap your head around, but hopefully this is something that you'll decide to discuss as a class too, because I just think it's critical for building a successful farm. So we already saw the crops that we're planting. What this does, it just makes a list of the unique crops. So if you plant radish a dozen times in a dozen different beds, it's only going to be listed here once. So what we're looking at is just the individual crops as a whole and calculating some numbers based on the projected revenues. All right, so the first one here is just straight revenue. This is basically the number that we saw up there already. So if you look at radishes in particular, we're estimating $21,000 in revenue from radishes. And if we go down to tomatoes, I think this is a particularly interesting case, which is why I'm pointing out these two. You have $37,000 estimated revenue from tomatoes. Now, as a farmer going to a farmer's market, or selling through any of the other outlets that you have, I want you to think about what the most profitable crops you have are. And again, jot it down on a piece of paper, discuss it with the class, pause the video, whatever. I want you to think about that and then come back. So one of the things that I think is interesting is when we think about profitability for a crop, there are a lot of things that go into determining that. And revenue numbers can be misleading, which is what I hope this will reveal to you shortly. So we can already see that in terms of straight revenue, tomatoes are going to bring in more than radishes. However, radishes are going to take up less space in terms of area, and they're also going to be in the ground a shorter period of time, measured in days in this case. So what I started to do after looking at revenue is look at revenue per area. So in the case of radishes, I showed you that example. They take up, the spacing is 2 inches. So they take up a lot less room. So that revenue number in terms of space changes. And then same with tomatoes. Tomatoes take up a lot more room. And so you're able to grow fewer of them, hypothetically. So you can see how already when we're trying to look at different common denominators, how the numbers are changing dramatically. So you have $21,000 of revenue coming from radishes. That's a total of 16%. And total revenue is 37 or about 30% coming from tomatoes. But then when we look at the percentage of revenue per area, we can see how much tomatoes drop. It's already down to 11%, whereas radishes have stayed at about 16%. And then, because radishes are able to cycle through a space so much more quickly, the numbers change even more when you look at revenue per area per day. So if you break it down in that way, you're looking at a particular amount of space over a particular amount of time. Radishes are bringing in, what is it, 23 cents per square foot per day. So that's 20% of your revenue numbers now when looking at it like that. And then tomatoes are down to 3 cents already. And that's not even counting things like labor, which are going to make an even bigger difference in the end numbers. So again, hopefully you can pause the video and discuss this concept in general, because I think it's really, really important to understanding how you can build a farm that is environmentally sustainable as well as profitable. Okay. Then at the last page here, we have the bottom line. So this is, again, just an example crop plan, and all the numbers are kind of funneling down to this final page, so you can kind of get a look at the basics and play around with the numbers. Because as beginning farmers in particular, I think it's important to put in different numbers and understand different scenarios so you can be prepared and have realistic expectations of what's going to happen in the future. So sales revenue is going to be 124,000, but as a farmer, you can definitely come up with other very creative ways to generate revenue. Maybe you want to do on-farm dinners, and that's going to bring in $2,000 of revenue in a year, and then do farm tours, which brings in $5,000 in revenue. So these sorts of revenue add up, but there's also labor costs involved. And so if it's you and somebody else and you want to pay yourselves decent salary, maybe that's $70,000, not 700, you guys would be some rich farmers, $70,000 in revenue. And your input costs are going to be $6,000. And other costs, equipment or gas for the truck, farmers markets fees, whatever, is going to be another 12,000. So you can see how that starts to eat into your profit, and it's really important that you think those through in detail. This is very, very high level. You can imagine a list a mile long of all the costs, but this will just help you start to pick away at that idea. And here is just a very simple, again, opportunity to look at ranges, because nothing ever happens as planned. So you can look at how that looks like with plus or minus 20%, whatever the case. But the bottom line is you have a profit of $43,000 at this point now that you can use to reinvest in the farm maybe, or store away for a rainy day, whatever the case may be. It's your business. But you can see how none of this would have been possible without actually putting the numbers into the spreadsheet and crunching them and thinking about it critically. And I hope that you'll continue to take the time in class today to discuss this amongst yourselves and work through these and discuss different ideas with each other. Because for me personally, collaboration is really important part of learning. And it's one of the reasons I wish I could have been there today. But again, please use me as a resource in the future. And this is a tool I've had out there for a while and I've gotten some positive feedback on. And it's motivated me to actually build it into an application, a web app that you'll be able to bring up on your phone or computer, and it'll be a bit more dynamic and robust. And we're actually looking for people to test that for us. So if you're interested in using that, let me know. I'd love to buy you lunch and have you sit down and use it and share your candid, honest feedback with me. So again, I'm always open. Aaron has my contact info. I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.